Hello, Forever Family. My name is Shannon. I'm the recovery pastor at Trustful First United Methodist Church. And today I want to talk to you about the recovery step that's titled Ready. So in AA, this is step 6, and it says, we became ready to remove our flaws listed in our inventory. So in CR, this lesson is 14, and it goes with principle 5, which is also with step 6, and it says, we were entirely ready to have God remove our defects of character. Okay, so leading up to this point in recovery, we have gone through self-reflection, through listing our inventories, confessing our junk, admitting stuff to someone we trust, and now we're ready for the change. Okay, so if you're new into recovery and you're probably saying, what are you talking about inventory? Which warehouse did we inventory? The warehouse is our heart. It's our actions, it's our thoughts. Basically, we are the warehouse. It's hurts that have been inflicted upon us. It's how we use those hurts to actually hurt ourselves, and then how we repackage them, and we send that hurt back out into the world to hurt more people. Which is why in recovery you hear people say hurting people hurt people, because that's what you do. When your heart is consumed with hurt and pain and anger and all those things, all we have to give back is hurt and pain and all those things. So we're all born into sin. It's because of our flesh thorns. We can't just remove those flesh thorns like it's a splinter. We first must see the flesh thorn for what it really is. And we need to see how it controls our lives. Because wherever we dwell, we become. So again, whatever comes into our heart is what we send back out. And whatever thoughts we entertain, those are shown eventually through our actions. So the ready step, it can look like, when you're up to the ready step, it's like saying, I've previously decided to stop acting like nothing's wrong. This is the step where we say we come out of denial, we admit we're powerless, we're not God, we're not in control of our situation. The ready step is also saying, I need help fighting my flesh thorn. You know, if we could do this on our own, we wouldn't have recovery programs. You wouldn't be watching this video. We would all be living blessed lives. But we can't do it on our own. So we need help. Now, we also say in this step of ready, now I see my actions according to how my flesh thorn controls me. So that's where we get into our inventory and really start breaking down how we take our hurt and repackage it and send it back out into the world. So when we're ready, we're saying, I'm ready for God to remove my defects of character that are fueled by my flesh thorn. Okay, so in this recovery step, every step in recovery is a time of reflection. It's something new that we learn about ourselves in order to keep growing. And everything in a recovery process is a pruning process. We're learning, we're growing, but there's also parts of us that we don't want to keep taking along on the journey. So in this step, through this self-reflection, we are looking in the mirror of our inventory. We are acknowledging the damage that we've received by others. We acknowledge the damage that we are casting out to others. We've decided that we don't really like the picture that we see. This inventory paints a really tough picture sometimes for us to wrap our thoughts around and to really understand this is how the world sees us. So we become ready for a change. We're ready to give up our addictions. Now we know you can't give up everything all at once. But there's a step, there's a process. I'm going to lay one thing down. I'm going to get control. God's going to remove this part of this flesh thorn. Then I can start working to submit something else to Him. So as we're ready to give up our addiction, then we're ready to let go of what the world has given to us through false satisfaction. You know, that temporary satisfaction, and then you keep searching and searching because you need the next level of happiness, but the world can never deliver that. So we get to the point where we are ready for God to work in us. Now, again, if we could change on our own, you wouldn't be watching this video. There would be no recovery programs. But the truth is, we don't have the power. Our willpower is not strong enough. We're not disciplined enough to fight those flesh desires. And let's face it, we cave every single time that we start living our lives for ourselves. We cave into everything that the world and the enemy taunts us with and tries to keep us in bondage with. Basically, we fall for the lies of the guilt and the shame that the enemy keeps whispering to us. This all goes back to the Garden of Eden. Even Eve fell victim to this. The only thing that the enemy can do to us is plant seeds of doubt. And I know there are people that have heard me say this so many times that they're probably sick of hearing me say this. But that's really all the enemy can do, is plant those seeds, and it's our flesh that acts upon them. When God said, do not eat of the fruit, the enemy said, really? Is that really what God said? Are you sure? And then she acted upon her flesh, and she took the fruit. She was leaning on her own understandings. She was caving to her flesh temptations instead of obeying God and leaning on His understanding and His truth. Now, we're not born with all the knowledge of making good and bad decisions. The world is waiting, ready to school us in how the world wants us to make decisions. We have outside influences that shape our thoughts, our actions, our reactions, our emotions, even our morals. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people that had a great, solid foundation in their family of morals and standards and service, and they were raised in church, and then the world comes along. And it always ends up with them saying, I never thought I would do this. I never thought I would say this. I never thought, because they weren't raised like that. Addiction, the enemy, bondage, sin, all of that. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what family you came from. It doesn't care how much money you came from. It doesn't matter. It doesn't discriminate. The enemy welcomes everyone with open arms that he can hold in bondage to sin and to our flesh. And that's why, with everything that impacts our character and shapes us, that's why when the world comes in and shapes and changes it, we call it our character defects, because it is of this world. We're acting upon how the world wants us to act. So how do we walk out the ready step? How do we discipline ourselves to stay in God's obedience? Have you ever seen the movie Facing the Giants? Now, if you've seen this movie, you're probably thinking of the scene from the death crawl, which is a great parable to somebody who needs to just keep pushing on. Don't give up, keep pushing on, okay? But that's not the scene I'm talking about. So let me set this up for you. If you haven't seen this movie, it centers around a football coach, two assistant coaches, and a football team. And so no matter what they do in practice to prepare for the game, they always come up short on the scoreboard. So they're frustrated. There are team members that are transferred to other schools with better football teams. There are team members that are still showing up for practice, but they're going through the motions instead of actually getting involved in learning and changing anything about the team. So in other words, they're showing up, but they've already given up. How many times in recovery have we seen people that are showing up to the meetings, but they've already given up? And we try to talk to them and encourage them, but it's a brick wall. This team felt that too. So one day the coach is in his office and he sees this man walking down the hall, and he's putting his hand all along the lockers, and he hasn't seen him before, doesn't know who he is. One of the assistant coaches says, calls him by name, and I'm paraphrasing, so this probably gonna leave out a lot of details in the movie, but he calls him by name, and he says he's praying. So as he passes the lockers, he's praying over the kids and the school and everything that's going on. So the coach goes out there and talks to him and basically says, do you really believe praying over this school is going to make a difference? And this is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. The guy says to the coach, and he tells him a parable basically. He says there are two farmers and they're in the middle of a drought. One leaves his field unattended because he's waiting for the rain to come. But one goes out every single day and works his field. Even though the rain isn't coming yet, he still works his field. So when the rain does come, his field will yield crops. Again, the other farmer's waiting on the rain. He's not going to do any work until he sees rain hit his fields. He's waiting for the perfect condition before he puts in the work. So the man says to the coach, the rain will come. You've got to keep preparing your field for when the rain does come. How many times have we ourselves been in situations where we're waiting on the whole situation to be perfect? Or maybe there's someone watching this video that feels like you've got to clean yourself up and be perfect before you come to a recovery meeting. God doesn't ask for perfection. He doesn't ask for that. We can't achieve perfection until he takes us home and heals us completely of this world. Let me ask you this question. Are you frustrated in your current situation? Do you feel like you're coming up short no matter how you prepare? Do you feel like you're in a drought season? I promise you, the living water is real, and his rain is coming. And when his rain comes, he's pouring out grace like rain. We have to keep preparing our fields for when the rain comes. Again, we can't wait for the perfect condition to occur before we go to God. We cannot clean up enough before deciding we're going to change. We cannot tell God that we will be ready when he meets our standards of what we need. We must prepare our fields for rain. We must go through all of our self-reflection, each step, each lesson in recovery, and we must ask God to remove our character defects. Are you preparing your field for rain? In this recovery step, as we're working toward preparing our fields for rain, we just need God one step at a time, because if we look at the big picture, it's so overwhelming, it's scary, and we will run from our recovery. I've seen many people do that, be right on the brink of a breakthrough and run from their recovery. Not necessarily relapse, but run from their support system, because it's scary. When we say, here's all my junk and I'm putting it out there, it's very scary. The enemy wants us to be afraid. So, as we're preparing our field for rain, and we go to God and ask him to remove our character defects, aka the weeds in our field that we're preparing for the rain, we want to receive blessing upon blessing. In other words, a bumper crop. But that only happens when we prepare the field by going to God, so that when God pours out the rain, there will be many, many blessings and much praise given to him. So how do we do this? So first, every day, every prayer needs to be centered around your will be done. We're not giving God a list of demands. We're not giving God a list of how we want the situation to be perfect. It needs to be centered around, God, your will be done, regardless what it is. Now, keep in mind, that means he's going to remove some people from our lives. He's going to bring some new people into our lives, but it's his will, and it's perfect when it's his will. We only mess things up. That's why we're here at this recovery step, trying to work the steps to get back to the life we were really meant to have. So the second thing, write down the things that cause you, or the events or the people that trigger fear, anger, worry, self-pity, guilt, shame, or any of these other things that would be considered weeds in our field. When we feel these emotions that are starting to come up, the best thing we can do is go to God in prayer. I wasn't raised in church, but the first thing I did when I started my faith walk is I printed out the Lord's Prayer, and you're probably going to laugh at me. It was on a piece of paper, I kid you not, that was maybe this big, a little bit tiny. And I cut it out and I put it on the dash of my car. So when those emotions started coming up in me and I felt like they were just about to take over me, I would say the Lord's Prayer over and over and over and over. So see, before I even knew how to say it, I had it there in front of me on a piece of paper and I could read it until I learned the Lord's Prayer. So when these emotions are coming up in you in that situation, start praying. Okay? By praying, we're going to God. We're looking for the positive. We're asking God to remove these things from our life, but we're also telling the enemy that his lies no longer will consume us. They will not control us. We're going to rebuke it and we're going to give it to God. The third thing, at the end of every day, we must confess our struggles. We must confess our struggles to God and to ourselves. And I tell people sometimes this means standing in front of the mirror and actually verbalizing. But sometimes we need to also stand in front of the mirror and say, I give you permission to grieve. I give you permission to cry, and I forgive you. That's hard. That's very hard for some people. So again, the third thing, at the end of every day, we confess our struggles to God. You know, as he starts removing our old ways, our character defects, we need to also spend time, and this is something I personally did. The scripture was given to me, and it's just something I did in my recovery walk. Psalms 51. When I got to the step of ready, I read Psalms 51. Sometimes once a day, sometimes several times a day. But that was my go-to. You know, and somebody may share a scripture that speaks more to you in your situation, and that's fine. I just want to share that mine was Psalms 51. And then lastly, make sure that we are an example of preparing our fields for the rain during the drought. So in other words, don't listen to the world's advice. The world has plenty of advice. It also has plenty of traps. The world has an unlimited supply for whatever your flesh thorn wants. Keep that in mind. It is only supplying your flesh thorn with the things that keep you in chains to sin. I had this said once to me, and it's stuck with me. When he talks about not listening to the advice of the world, you know, Noah was preparing for a flood that wasn't in the worldly weather forecast. God will speak to you about things that no one else will understand, and that's okay. I tell everybody to journal and write those things down, because you will look back and see that God was speaking things into your life long before he ever opened the door for those things to happen. So this lesson in recovery is called Ready. It's a hard lesson, but it's also an easy lesson if you've worked your previous lessons, because we all know recovery works if you work it. So work every single step. And when you get to this point, man, if you're like me, I was praising. Every time I turned around, I was praising. Thank you, Jesus, for this. Thank you for that. Thank you for removing this person. Thank you for bringing me this person. Because I've got so many mentors in my life that I didn't meet until I was in this step of recovery, which is ready. So remember, always, always, always speak life. Be a blessing. Put your faith feet into action to cause a ripple effect. And I'm talking like Keep preparing your field for the rain, because when the living water comes and pours out his mercy and his grace and his forgiveness and his blessings, you will see a bumper crop. But not only will you see that, people around you will see that, and they'll say, I don't know what you've got, but I want it. So part of the ready step is also be ready to openly confess and praise what God has done in your life, because somebody needs to hear of his love. Too many people have only heard of hellfire and brimstone. We need to start telling people that God really loves every single one of us, no matter what we look like, no matter what we've done in our past. We're all still children of God. So until next time, much agape, everybody.